Hello everyone, and welcome to the Shakespearean Shrew. I am your Shakespearean Shrew, Karen Feiner, professor from the University of Oklahoma and lover of all things Bard. This podcast is a decorum be damned entrance into understanding the stages of Shakespeare, for there are many, and all the players on it. We are in Gangnam, Seoul. Please forgive my pronunciation because I'm going to butcher things left and right, I promise. But I am with Charles Jeong, artistic director of Seoul Shakespeare and amazing artist. We're going to get into that later. And I am with Jason Lane Cutler, who is a board member of Shakespeare Seoul and director of the upcoming production, which is, spoiler alert, but this isn't coming out until after they've already announced it, Romeo and Juliet. I am so excited to be doing this. I am so excited to be here. It's been really fun so far, and this is going to be the best day yet. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So, Shakespeare in Korea. So what is Shakespeare like here? What is the reputation of the bard in Korea? I know I'm an English professor, this is my happy place, and my students constantly ask me, why do we have to learn Shakespeare? So here, what's the reputation of Shakespeare? Is it really prevalent? Is it something, because I mean, if Seoul Shakespeare is its own thing, it seems like it's a pretty big deal.
I think Charles would have a better answer for this since he's grown up Korean. But I would have to say you might be surprised how many people are very familiar with Shakespeare's most popular plays. And wasn't it this year? Did the National Theatre do King Lear this year, or was it something else?
Macbeth.
It was Macbeth this year. Of course, it would not be in English. It would be translated completely into Korean and cut however the director wants it to be cut.
Yeah. Well, Shakespeare was not part of the education. But he's definitely famous and everybody knows the name. Everybody must have heard of famous titles like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, King Lear. So I'd say the reputation of the bard here is like everywhere else in the world, basically. Yeah. I'm reminded of I'm paraphrasing, I think it's Mark Twain who said it, how they define classic. It's like, classic is what everybody knows, but nobody has ever read the material. So that's basically the status of Shakespeare here in Korea. Everybody has heard of it, but if you ask like detailed questions, who dies in Romeo and Juliet? Is Hamlet a happy ending? Who's King Lear? People would be,
Interesting, okay.
As soon as you said that, I just remembered all that, the same expression that everybody gives. So have you ever read that play? And they just kind of give this. The same.
Yeah. I'm ready for the movie adaptation.
That's another cross-cultural thing with Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's so interesting because based on what you just said, it's not part of the curriculum here, where in the United States, everybody reads Shakespeare their freshman year, probably their sophomore year in high school. So they've all read usually Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Those are kind of the staples. And most students hate him for it because reading Shakespeare is not how Shakespeare is supposed to be anyway. So I'm wondering, so everybody seems to know about him. I'm kind of wondering if people have that preconceived dislike of Shakespeare and his language.
That's an interesting point. Because we have you have your own Shakespeare to torment the students. We have our own rules to torment the students. We have our own 16th century Korean literature, which I had to learn in school. It was written in Korean, but it did not sound anything like Korean, and we were forced to study it. I never liked it, and then I graduated, and then I came back to it, and I tried to read it for fun. And it worked, because I finally got to understand the beauty of it. So I think for Shakespeare, the impression I've had throughout my experience with Seoul Shakespeare Company here in Korea is that we actually have easier access to the general Korean public here. because people have never been tormented by Shakespearean texts, right?
I love that.
So but they know about the fame,
Right.
and we have this amazing degree of intellectual vanity. People want to seem smart, right? And if you consider the killing amount of the amount of the contests and the people want to look smart and want to look successful in life. So if you sell them Shakespeare, if you tell them you're doing Romeo and Juliet, you're doing Hamlet, you can see them salivate.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So it has more draw to the audience because they are ignorant of the material.
That's interesting. So it's almost like a intellectual wealth.
Yes.
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 So who is your tormentor? You said there's who is the Korean academic tormentor for
송강 정철.
Okay.
Every Korean students would scream to hear the name. It's another, I think it's 15th century, 16th century, who was a politician, was an aristocrat, but then who had his own political maneuvers, which then failed. So he was sent into exile, and he wrote a lot of poetry because he had a lot of free time. And most of the poetry was catering towards the capital, to the king, so that he could move him, so that eventually he would take him back. So they were beautiful poetry,
Yes.
but difficult, and the language sounded distant. So
It's the same thing with Shakespeare. It's the same thing with my students will be like, well, but this isn't English. And I'm like, but it is. But it doesn't, they struggle with understanding and comprehending the language, the rhythm of it, all that. Again, it doesn't help that the first time they usually have access to it, it's read this. And
By a teacher who generally doesn't comprehend it as well. So at least that was my case. I don't know about others. Because I read Romeo and Juliet when I was in 9th grade.
Oh, yeah.
And all the students were speaking it just da 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 da. Just awful.
Yeah, it's our version of the torture.
Yeah.
So speaking of the language, because I think you started talking about Shakespeare, and so most productions, all productions of Shakespeare are in Korean?
right.
This
They're
is
all
Korean.
translated.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense to me. But the language, because that's kind of what Shakespeare's known for, is his language, the iambic pentameter, his ability to work within that rhythm and create verse and prose. How does that translate?
They don't.
Okay. So is it more the stories you tell?
It's more of the stories, it's more of the characters. Because whenever we do a production, well, this is our company is the expert, based on the expert community, so we do Shakespeare in its original language, but you have to make subtitles for the Korean audiences.
Okay.
And I do the translation and I make the subtitles, and every time I try to translate the bard's work, I have this realization that this is impossible. All the puns are lost, all the rhythms are lost, all the humor is lost. So I do my best. The thing called the iambic pentameter and the blank verse.
Yes.
Korean language and English language is such a starkly different language.
Yes.
So I couldn't find any equivalent of the blank verse that could be translated into Korean language. But I do my best so that if Shakespeare tries to say something in a very contract sentence, in a very simple sentence, he does that a lot.
Right.
He tries to convey these big ideas, but it would be like one sentence.
Right.
Everything is like crammed in it, and I just try my best. Okay, the easy way would be to just explain everything, just make this, stretch it into 3 or 4 sentences, which would be easy, but that's not the spirit. I have to find the right word and right expression so that, okay, this is supposed to be a big idea conveyed in a very symbolic language. So I try to do that, but I think 7 out of 10, they just don't work. I only hope that I can convey the idea. So I think that also gives Korean productions more freedom because they are not constrained by this language
Right.
system. So,
Yeah, you set yourself with a pretty
right.
difficult task.
So I see a lot of productions. And if you go to a play like Hamlet, I know Hamlet like inside out,
Mhm.
like backwards. I know the text. And I watch a play, but like he's not supposed to say that. Where's my soliloquy? When happens my soliloquy? And what they would do, they would dissect the play, they would divide it, and they would reassemble it. Sometimes it turns out to be an abomination, I have to say. But sometimes they come up with this very original, interesting ideas. So I think that's one of the perks of being an outsider of the English language, because we have more freedom.
You're not bound by that tradition.
Right, right.
So Seoul Shakespeare, unlike like the National Theater, so the
Mhm.
National Theater production Macbeth,
Mhm.
right? That was translated into
Mhm.
Korean and was a Korean production.
Yes.
Your productions, though, are usually in early modern
Oh.
English, and then
Oh yeah.
Original
you do
text.
subtitles for them.
Yes.
We
That's
tend
our.
to mix the first and second folio, right? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. That's our first principle. We do Shakespeare's language in his original language because that's our belief that his spirit lies in the language. It's all about the language. So our idea was to let's give the general audiences in Korea a chance to hear Shakespeare in his original language with Korean subtitles.
Right.
So,
So with that, because again, there's a reason that you're not supposed to read Shakespeare, because Shakespeare is all about embodying the
Mhm.
language, producing the
Mhm.
language, not just with what you're saying, but how you're performing. That's a lot of what Shakespeare is. Does that translate? Does that help people, even if there's a language, another language barrier? You have multiple hurdles to jump over, right? You've got the early modern,
Mhm.
plus if you've got a significant Korean audience,
Mhm.
you've also got an extra hurdle.
right.
So with all of that, do you find that your audience is still responsive? They get a lot of the jokes. You can convey it through action and through that element?
If we're doing our job, yes.
Mhm.
But I think everybody's had the experience of having an unresponsive audience.
Oh,
But it's
yes.
our job not to do that.
Mhm.
It's the worst feeling ever.
Mhm.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah, and sometimes I observe that some scenes, because whenever there's a production going on the stage, I stay behind the curtain and just look at the audience and just peep at the audience to see their reactions. And every so often I find Korean people are more responsive to what's going on the stage because for English speakers, they have to listen everything in 16th century English. But Korean people, we give them all the answers, written in easy Korean because I made it easy
Right.
because subtitles.
There's
not
enough.
a book.
There's enough difficulties.
Yeah,
Yes.
when we first started using subtitles for our show back in 2013 and 2014, what we would do, we would just basically copy and paste from the translated text of Shakespeare's play. So there would be like paragraphs and paragraphs on the screen. And then Korean people were not focusing on what's going on the play, what
Right.
the actors are doing. So, okay, I changed the whole system. It has to be like a movie subtitle. Every line should not exceed more than 2 lines. They should be able to quickly follow it so they can understand what's going on and be able to focus on the actors.
Right.
So they laugh, they cry, they're more responsive because they have sometimes they have better idea of what's going on the stage.
If an actor is doing their job, you don't have to understand what they're saying. You can feel what they're saying.
Mm.
Do
But
they-
sometimes when the soliloquies are going on and on and on and on, it helps to understand what the
Yes.
actors are saying.
Then the actor needs to speed up and
Right.
realize
They
when you
have to
can
read
see
room.
the audience doing this,
Right.
What
taking
time
out
is
their
it?
bag of popcorn.
Mm. Take out their cell phones.
Oh.
It's the biggest enemy to the theater.
It's the biggest enemy to all of us. As a
to all
teacher.
civilization. To all civilization.
Oh man, yes, it's brutal. So, funding for the
Oh.
theater. I know, I get that same response from every artistic director I talk to. What is that like here? Is this, I'm guessing by your response that it's not funded from the government. No. Okay, so what does that look like? How do you get?
How many hours do we have? We need an hours and hours and hours to
Do you want to talk about the entire history of it?
We've taken a whole journey
Yeah.
to set up a current system. So long story short, this Seoul Shakespeare Company is a non-profit organization, so none of us are getting paid. But we still need money to rent the theaters and rent this. We need a lot of money. And Shakespeare, every time I moan, why didn't Shakespeare never write plays with 2 people, 3 people? Every play requires at least 15 plus individuals to stage a play with the crew members, and we need a big space with big dressing room, and that costs a lot of money. So there were times when we relied heavily on the crowdfunding. We would do fundraisers, we would do online campaign. Sometimes it was successful, sometimes it was not. When we did Hamlet, we had this guy named Jan who was a French military person who
Young
sent us-
Kurlock?
C'est comme moi.
Okay. I know a different
Maybe I'm
one.
butchering his name, but he sent us a lot of money.
Oh.
He didn't know who we were, but he was just excited by the idea that there's people in Korea, South Korea, doing Shakespeare. And he himself is a big Shakespeare fan, so he sent us a lot of money, and he came all the way from Paris to Korea to see the production. So things like that happen, but we cannot always rely on those serendipitous incidents. So currently, we have our own Lord Chamberlain, we have our own King James, we have our own patron.
Okay.
So we are currently in the partnership of one of the cultural foundations. So yes, they fund us, and they are very generous, and they understand art, and they support people doing art. So happening since the epidemic of COVID, we found a patron, and we are currently operating under the patronage of the aristocrats, rich people.
We are grateful to you, whoever you
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
It was a very dark time before him. So he came in shining his light.
Because COVID affected
Very lucky.
everyone,
Oh, yes.
including ourselves. So we lost our theater, we lost the funding, we lost the productions.
Yeah, we were doing As You Like It, and we had to cancel it.
Yes.
We were
Oh,
what,
yes.
4 weeks from opening? 3 weeks from opening?
So you used to have a facility that was specifically, or that was just the rental?
We would generally find one, a different one every time. We used to have the one in
Maybe one space
in
that
Haewa.
was just perfect for us, and we were in a good relationship with the owner, so we would use this space every year. But that space went out of business during COVID. A lot of theaters, a lot of rehearsal spaces went out of business, so we had to start from scratch since the COVID. But yeah, we had a lot of help, and especially the Seoul Shakespeare people, the board members, they helped a lot. So we are currently on our feet and moving forward.
Very nice. How many productions do you normally do a year?
We do one main stage major production in spring, and during fall we would do a minor production, which doesn't necessarily have to be Shakespeare. We did a adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's short stories for Halloween a couple of years ago. Sometimes to celebrate special occasions like the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's birth or death, we would do a collection of monologues, soliloquies, and a collection of famous scenes. And we also have our sister players troupe called Soul Players, and they do their own productions, especially during fall. So we operate under the partnership with those companies. So for us, our own sole production would happen once or twice a year. But with the partnership with this other company, there would be as many as 4, maybe 5 productions per year.
The important point to make is that all of the expat theater companies in Seoul are quite incestuous. So we have the spring, That's our space.
Mhm.
Okay.
The solo players, they often have the autumn and the winter
Right.
time. And if you have more than one show going on, then that means people are spread very thin. The good actors are snatched.
Yeah.
We do have professional actors that we use, but most everybody is an English teacher. And not everybody is from overseas. Because we have lots of Korean people as well.
That's great. So for a lot of people, is this just something they love to do and an opportunity for them to do what they love to do?
Yes. We did Midsummer Night's Dream this year, and those famous mechanicals, when they're prepping for the stage, our reaction was, "This is us."
Yes.
Clint's bottom flute, they are us. The way they prepare, how unprofessional they are. This is so us. Just be ourselves.
Yeah.
That's what you told to the actors. Just be
They
yourself.
were trying to be funny and just play it straight. It's going to be funny if you play it straight. And then they did it, and it was funny. When I first moved to Korea, I thought I wasn't going to do any acting at all, because I moved here just kind of for a new life. I was living in New York City for 5 years. I had a theater company there. I moved here thinking, I'm just going to be a teacher now. And then immediately I was inundated with all this community theater, thinking, well, I don't have to quit after all.
Yeah.
And then I didn't. Theater just follows you, and it won't let you go once it has its claws in you.
It's the community, I think.
Yes.
You build bonds with people in the theater world that are different than any other community, I think.
Yeah, the biggest loss that we felt during COVID was not the loss of opportunity to shine on stage, but the loss of opportunity to hang out with people. The community of theater was such a strong bond to hold the community together. So that's why we cherish it.
Has it been difficult to get people, because I know in the United States, it's been difficult to get people back to the theater after COVID. A lot of people were like, oh, I can watch theater from my house. I can put it on, I can stream it and put it on TV. And so they've been struggling to get an audience to come back in person. Has that been the same here, or do you think people have been coming out?
I wouldn't say so. What would you think?
Well, we did pretty well during COVID, government-wise, so none of the theaters had to shut down. They had to take a very strong measure to prevent the infection from spreading. But actually, the Phantom of the Opera came to Korea during COVID because COVID was one of those few places in the world where they could actually still do musical. And I remember the cast members distinctly expressed their gratitude towards Korean people and the Korean government for giving them the opportunity to resume the theater. But yeah, there was, for us, we had to close the production, we had to cancel the production. But when we come back, right after COVID, we opened with the adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's show. And my biggest fear was that no one's gonna come watch this show. They must have forgotten.
Yes.
Like it's been years, and I would have nightmares. But when we opened, we would sell out shows. People just turned up, and that was the most powerful and beautiful moments that I experienced, because I realized that they have been wanting to watch the show. They have been wanting to go watch a play with people.
Right. They're desperate for it.
Right.
That's great. It's so interesting because I went around the United States this summer for a fellowship and talked to different Shakespeare companies, and they're still struggling. They are still struggling to just get audiences back because they just want to watch it at home. They don't understand, I think, the experience of seeing it in person versus watching it on a screen.
Film and theater are two different things.
Right. And I've never really enjoyed watching plays recorded on video.
No, I was about to say that, but then those filmed productions of Shakespeare's Globe.
Those
Those
are
are so
fabulous.
good.
Those are fabulous.
But they're shot so well. That is something.
They are.
If it's just
They
a
are.
static camera,
Yes.
it is
Painful.
boring. Because you, again, to harp on the feeling, you can't feel what's going on. That's so much a part of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's sorrowful to hear. I didn't have any idea that
Yeah.
companies are struggling.
Sorry to hear that.
But I don't know. Shakespeare isn't the most popular. There's not enough explosions. Sometimes there are sex scenes, but usually not. So
Yeah, where are the, robots and the we need all of that.
you can adapt it that way, but I don't know that it would be a good idea.
It's interesting. I mean, I've got somebody back in Oklahoma who is he's doing a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream and doing it as like a reality TV show.
Oh,
So
that's interesting.
Yeah, I was like, huh. So I don't know. I'm excited to see it.
Reality TV
You
show
see how it
about young
works.
couples getting drugged.
Exactly.
My theories.
That makes sense.
Right? I was like, oh.
See, that's the beauty of doing Shakespeare. That could be interpreted in so many different ways.
I don't know. I think it could work if they were interviewed like they are on reality shows.
Yeah, I
In
think.
iambic pentameter, and that would be hard.
I mean, that's the plan. The plan is to keep the language the same,
Mhm.
and so
Wow.
I am very excited for this production. It's going to be a very new take, and that's what I love
Yeah.
about live theater is that you can do something completely different
Yeah.
every time with the same production,
Yes.
and it almost feels like a different production.
Right. Right.
I mean, in a sense, it kind of is. So you you are directing Romeo and Juliet.
Mm.
You did direct Midsummer or
I
not?
did not. No.
You were just in it.
Yeah, we both produced that.
Oh, okay.
So we both performed and produced and
Yes.
lots of stuff. Yeah,
Very nice. So what role did you play?
I was Oberon.
Very nice.
And I was Theseus.
Oh, okay.
Which
You're
is-
your counter.
Often that's double cast. right?
Yes.
The same actor.
That's what I was gonna say. You are your each other's counterparts.
Right. That's so much fun doing Midsummer.
So, comedies versus tragedies.
Tragedy. I love this TV show, Upstart Crow, with David Mitchell playing Shakespeare. It's comedy. It's so funny, and I think it's one of the earlier episodes where Shakespeare's wife Anne tells Shakespeare, "Well, maybe you should stick to writing tragedy. Comedy has never been your strong suit." Yeah.
So, how about you? Comedy, tragedy, history.
I like them all. And as a company, we tend to go from one to the other, from year to year.
Mm.
So
We try to
last
switch.
last one was comedy, and then this one would be comic tragedy, I would say, because Romeo and Juliet's funny.
Romeo and Juliet is
Mm.
funny. It's what makes it great. Is
Mm.
the first act is one of his funniest.
Yeah.
I would say even Act 4, honestly, with Capulet and the nurse and Juliet. Just anyway.
I mean, the
It's-
nurse
it
is
can be
one
really-
of his best
Yeah, characters.
characters.
Her opening monologue about her dead daughter and then the husband and then the dirty jokes and wow, it's. But again, you have I don't know. I'm stressing most about casting because we still. Who's gonna play the nurse? I don't know anybody. You want to play the nurse?
I would.
Yeah.
I would love to play the nurse.
I mean, it's perfect. And Shakespeare, that's the way it went anyway.
Right.
It was,
Because it's a guy in drag
yes.
with bumpy bits.
Yes.
Fake saying these outlandish things.
The nurse, I feel like is one of those over the top characters
Yes.
that you can just.
Yes. You can just be over the top
Yes.
and still be funny.
Until she thinks that Juliet's dead.
Yes.
And then she is really sad and is never seen again. And that's when the play flips to me.
That's a great point. It is the turning point for.
Yeah. But still, I still yearn to do history. We have never
Mhm.
done history plays. But I love history. Richard II and Richard III are two of my favorite Shakespeare plays. But we never had a chance to do it because it requires a big cast, and
Right.
normally they would come with battle scenes and bigger venues. So, but it's on the list. It's on our bucket list.
And not to mention, Richard III would get an audience because it's a rather
Mhm.
famous play.
Mm.
But honestly, right now, we're trying to do plays that, this sounds bad, but plays that people want to see.
Yeah.
Because we like some
Yeah.
of the lesser known ones. We did a production of Measure for Measure a few years ago, and honestly, it wasn't bad, it was pretty good, but our audiences were small because nobody knew that play.
And we had a tiny theater, so it seemed like we had a good audiences because the
It
theater was
not-
tiny.
It was not a bad. I've been in bad productions before. That production was okay, but we couldn't get the audiences because they didn't recognize it, and it was a small theater. So
Right.
we're trying to do the shows that people know more now. So if we were to do a history, yeah, I'd want to do Richard III or Henry IV Part 1, followed by Part 2 in the same year.
That'd be nice.
That's
Just
right.
do the whole series of King Henry and
Just
Falstaff.
one after another.
I think when we operated under the funding through the crowd, I think we had more liberty
Mhm.
when it comes to picking a play. But now that we're operating under the patronage, just like in Shakespeare
I was just gonna
time,
say, I was like, yeah,
we
this is-
have to make profit, at least not make any losses.
Yeah.
So the realization that we had when we did Measure for Measure, I love Measure for Measure,
Yes.
but it's not a known play, especially for Korean people. Actually, I struggled to find the right translation for the title. How do you translate Measure for Measure? I want it to be catchy, but yeah, we had a decent number of audiences, but still it was not so popular. And then we did Midsummer Night's Dream, and then we would have groups. We would have sold out shows, and then we realized that okay, the popularity matters.
Yes,
But
unfortunately.
We're doing theater for the community,
Mhm.
so we should be giving them what they want,
Mhm.
honestly.
Mhm.
Measure for Measure, we operated at a loss, but it wasn't that much of a loss.
Mhm.
Midsummer, we got a good profit. Romeo and Juliet, I think, would be really popular.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think so.
Is this what people want to see?
Yeah.
It has romance, it has violence,
Yeah.
it has everything, dirtiness, and yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So one of our fondest memory was back in 2016 when we did Much Ado About Nothing. Well, Much Ado, it's one of Shakespeare's most popular comedies for English-speaking people. But Much Ado, in Korea, is not a known play.
Oh,
You
okay.
ask 100 Korean people, maybe one or two of them would know, have ever heard about the title. So when we decided to do the play, I had this big concern. Because before Much Ado, we did plays like Hamlet, Macbeth, Titus Andronicus. Well, Titus Andronicus was not as popular as Hamlet, but because of what's going on in the play, people would come and be curious. But when they picked Much Ado, I had my concern. And then we opened, and we had sold out shows, and such a great response, and students would come to us after the play, and they would tell us that I've never seen any Shakespeare plays before, not to mention the Much Ado About Nothing, but now I see why people watch Shakespeare. Now I see why people say that Shakespeare could be funny and interesting. And it's like, yes, we gave public something they are not familiar with, and ended up making them enjoy the material.
Right.
So that would be our goal, the ultimate goal.
I think that's a good goal, and I think the way you're thinking about it in terms of maybe starting with some of the more popular history plays, and then, once you have an audience that loved that play and loved that production, then bringing them back in will be an easier
Timon of
feat.
Athens.
Yeah.
Or Titus Andronicus, well, which is not history. but-
Troilus and Cressida.
Yep.
King John, what about King John?
What-
Out of nowhere.
What would
King
happen
John.
to our sponsor then? Just shake his head. Such high hopes for these guys.
I mean, it is interesting because some of the content in Shakespeare, like in, Much Ado, or it can be a little off-putting as you look at what they're producing. Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Merchant of Venice. There are productions that a lot of people now are staying away from.
Yeah, that's one of the things that require trigger warnings these days. Not so much in Korea, but yeah, we attended the SDA Shakespeare Theatre Association annual conference back in 2019, and we would hear stories of how audiences were kind of offended by what's going on in the play, and the whole company got into big trouble because of what Shakespeare wrote. So
it's been very interesting, and it's exciting to hear that that's not really an issue as much here, because yeah, I've talked to a lot of companies that won't touch Merchant of Venice. I talked to one actor who was told not to play Shylock because it was Jew face. And I'm Jewish, and I had never heard the term Jew face before, but it's a non-Jewish actor playing Shylock. And I was like, I'm sorry, what is that?
That's what the acting is all about.
I was just a little horrified. And then, women, and that is a whole other kettle of fish, where Taming of the Shrew, where the Shakespearean Shrew comes from, again, is another production that a lot of companies won't touch because it's too difficult to deal with, how Kat is treated, how Kate is looked at in the play.
That play is a favorite topic of mine, because when I first read it, I had the same reaction. I thought, well, this is just bloody sexist, I don't like this. Then I saw a production in a park in New York, and they didn't play with it at all, they just kind of played it straight, that, yeah, this woman should be subjugated. And then the audience was all, and I just thought, what is this? And then I went and got drunk. But that's one of the plays that I really want to do, because we mentioned the Shakespeare's Globe earlier, and their filmed production of that, and I just happened to watch it on TV once. Oh, it's Taming of the Shrew, and this sucks. And then, oh my God, it is funny. It is so funny. And it's because they played every character like they're bug nuts crazy, because that's what they are. It's a farce. If you try to make it serious and about something, it doesn't work. It falls on its face. If you play everybody like they're crazy, it works just fine. And if you want to talk about how it's sexist, well, because it was written in that time. But Kate happens to be written as a wonderful, round character. And same with Shylock. He's one of the best written characters in all of English literary history.
Yeah.
So I think people are just looking to be offended, and they're not looking beneath the surface as to what it's really about. When it comes to Taming of the Shrew, it's just about being funny.
Yeah.
When we did Titus Andronicus, we did stage the rape scene, and we didn't get into any trouble for that back in 2014. But I wonder, if we were to do it again, would we be daring enough to stage the rape scene on the stage?
Was that in 2014?
2015. Sorry, 2014 was.
Wow.
Yeah, nearly 10 years ago.
That was right before I joined. I joined with Much Ado. Wow.
Yeah, that's a really good question, though. And what does it mean when it's almost like a threat? When kind of the audience holds a threat against you in terms of the decisions you make as a director? Because, like you said, we're here as theater people to help create an experience for our audience. And you said to give them, what they're interested in, what they want. Again, where's the line between what they want and, pushing? Because isn't some part of it supposed to challenge the audience? So, any thoughts on the boundaries there?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, from a personal point of view, I love getting challenged by movies or TV shows or play. So I look forward to being challenged.
I think everybody in this room does.
Right.
But she makes a good point, because not all the audience, I'd say
Some
70%
people,
of the audience is not interested. They just want to be entertained.
Or maybe they want some kind of healing experience from the stage. And when they are, without warning, they are faced with those off-putting materials, I understand that they are upset. But the whole point of doing art is that, the trigger warning is in itself, it's art. You have to take into consideration that unexpected things can happen throughout your experience, and that's what makes it exciting.
So we were talking about film and theater earlier, and with film you can do just about anything, because there's this barrier.
Right.
But theater, there's not really a barrier. It's happening right in front of us, and it's a lot more immediate and something that we can take in a painting or in a film or in a photo. We can't take when it's happening right in front of us. I don't like rape scenes, for example. It makes me want to kill somebody because I really don't like it. So that's my hang up with that. But that's something that I would want to discuss afterward and discuss with my friends and family or whatever. Oh, that was too much, don't you think so? Then the other person says, no, I thought it was artistic. Really? I disagree. That's what should happen. It's conversation after the show,
Yeah.
not condemnation.
Yes.
Unless something that is worth being condemned happens. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because we have fight choreographers, right? We have intimacy designers. Are those roles that you all have in your productions where you have somebody who's a fight choreographer, you have somebody, that's your jam. Do you have an intimacy designer? Is that something that
we used to invite, because we don't have an in-house
intimacy
coordinators, we would invite people to do the workshop for us before we start the actual rehearsals, if the play requires any intimacy coordination.
Yeah, I was always interested in that one because that's something relatively new, intimacy designers. That was not, when I was acting, we did not have that's like, oh. You played your role, you played your part. If you really got upset by something, you spoke up, but at your own risk, depending on who the director was. And
that's the key, is to protect the performers because we all know about what casting couches are and things such as that. In Measure for Measure, we talked about it, but we ended up actually not going with it because we trusted each other. So there's an almost rape scene in that. I was Angela. But we're all against taking it that far because it didn't serve the story.
Right.
Anyway, it's all internal with all of us, and that's actually more disturbing than actually seeing something on stage. So yeah, you could hear a pin drop every time we did that scene.
And for the rape scene, the actual rape scene in Titus Andronicus, we made sure that everyone in the room who are rehearsing the scene are comfortable. And we made sure that it was Lavinia, the actress who played Lavinia, initiating all the actions. I played the rapist. I was Kyron. And we only followed her cues to make her comfortable. And we trusted each other, and it's one of the perks for being in a community theater. We know each other. We've been friends for a long time, so none of us are strangers to each other. So we know each other's methods. We know what's going on in the room. But yeah, for Romeo and Juliet, do you think we would have intimacy coordinator or Romeo and
You
Juliet?
need to talk to the actors first and see what they need. I would say, look, any kind of planning that happens right now, this would be interesting watching this video maybe about 6 months from now and see exactly how much changes between now and then. I don't foresee needing one, but it's possible.
Yeah.
It's
It
possible.
depends on who's cast and their level of comfort, and that's what's needed.
So you said that there's like kind of a small community of actors, and do you get the opportunity to give students in like drama departments their opportunities to perform?
By students, do you mean university students?
University students.
Most of them are too busy to be doing anything like that, but we have given students opportunities as assistant stage manager
Okay.
and backstage stagehands, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But they do have time for that. Particularly high school students, they don't have time for anything. But that's a long conversation about school culture in this country.
But we do hold auditions every time we stage a show, so there are chances to star in a Shakespeare play for everyone.
Yeah.
So we hold public auditions.
Anybody can audition, and we don't just cast our friends. We cast who's best for the role.
Right.
Every time.
So with Romeo and Juliet, we talked a little bit about the difficulty of casting somebody like the nurse, who's such a significant role in the tone of the play, of the performance. So as you think about casting, do you already have certain ideas in mind usually as a director, and you both, I think, have played that part, right, where you've directed. So are there certain things you consider, certain things you're looking for, and...
I have the show planned out. I know what tone I would like. I know how I want the audience to feel at the very end. I know what I'd like the costume to be. I know what I'd like the lighting to be. I know what time period it is. And I can cast every role with the people that we know right now, except for 4.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's Romeo and Juliet. And Tybalt and Mercutio.
Oh.
The core character.
Mercutio's another one who is one of my favorites.
I know people, but they'd all be Uncle Mercutio, not young Mercutio.
Yes.
And same with Romeo and Juliet. I'm trying to cut every line referring to her being 13 years old because we're going to have somebody who's at least 22. But they still need to be young.
Yeah.
It just doesn't
Or at
work.
least look young.
Yeah.
35-year-old lovers just doesn't. They need to be ingenue. So we'll see in auditions. So I encourage everybody who wants to audition to audition. It's open to everyone regardless of experience or Shakespearean ability. We have training for that.
Have you ever had an audition that has significantly changed the performance, where how you cast it changed your view of the show, changed your idea?
Interesting question. I mean, there would be, we would switch genders of the characters. Not necessarily because of our creative choices, but because of the
cast,
the pool of actors that we have, and the choice has been made to gender swap out of necessity because of the situation, but it ended up giving us a fresh new look on how to interpret the characters. So there would be roles where actually this works better when it's gender swapped. Or we would have a significantly older actor playing a younger role, or vice versa, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So we work with what we have, and that's the kind of unexpectedness. It's what makes theater exciting. But when it comes to Romeo and Juliet, one of the reasons why, although it's one of the most popular plays of Shakespeare, we've been putting it off for so long, is because we all share this concern that we would require a lot of young talents, and would we be able to find enough young talents in the community or in the general normal pool we have? But now we're giving it a try, and
Just
we'll
have to
see how
make
it
the
turns
jump.
out.
So your question is really good, and I can't think about your original question. I can't really think of any specific instances, but I would like to say that, for example, in this case, I told you that I have everything in my head exactly how I want it, but if somebody auditions in a certain way and turns that all on its head, that's not a bad thing. So I'm just reminded of Lauren's audition in Measure for Measure. As soon as I saw her, I thought, oh, okay, that's Isabel. And then I wasn't directing that. No, I was producing, and I just said to the director, you know, that's Isabel, right? And he said, let's keep looking. And she was Isabel. She was perfect. She was wonderful. But she embodied everybody's conception of that character, whether they knew it or not.
Yeah. We're all for the unconventional casting. We're all for it. But I think when it comes to Romeo and Juliet, I don't think let's say a middle-aged man playing Romeo would do the work for the audience, because with the audience would come with certain expectation. And I think the whole story of Romeo and Juliet works because they are young, they are teenagers, they don't have the fully developed prefrontal cortex. That's what makes it happen.
They're basically animals.
They are. They're driven by their hormones.
Yes.
And so.
But yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. That's the hard thing about classics,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is while they're well known, that same thing about them being well known allows people to have preconceived notions, and then if you disrupt those preconceived notions, you run the risk of a very disgruntled audience.
I'm just curious because in Shakespeare's time, Juliet should have been played by a boy actor.
Yes, correct.
Who has like a feminine voice, who didn't gone through the puberty yet. So it must have been a very young actor who should be able to portray such a great role. Not only for Juliet, but the roles like Rosaline or Cleopatra. So that's a big mystery for me personally. Is that how did that happen? Was it like people in the Elizabethan period, like just born different back then? Or did Shakespeare's company have this couple of very talented, super genius boy actors that make Shakespeare confident enough to pen those great roles?
I love being able to answer a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so Blackfriars. So there were theaters that trained young boys as actors. And so they started out mostly with like religious texts, etc., and religious productions. But then the acting troops started poaching those young boys.
The young asses.
And so Shakespeare created most of his productions, like Twelfth Night, right? He created Feste the Fool based on the fool that he had in his production company. So like William Kemp was known as a dancer. So all of his plays where he was the fool had a lot of dancing in it, like Merry Wives of Windsor. And then, other ones.
Robert Harmon.
Exactly, he was a great singer. So he was Feste for Twelfth Night where there's a lot of music. Same thing happened with his women, is that as they started finding these young boys who could play these roles, Shakespeare started creating much stronger women roles. And you start seeing things like As You Like It, where the woman has the last line, which is kind of amazing, because usually it's not the case. I mean, that's the only case, really. And she has so many lines. Usually the women don't have a lot of lines because he didn't want to give young boys a lot of lines to memorize. And that started shifting. So you kind of see the talents of the young individuals, the young men who are playing, men is a big word for those. But you see their abilities in what he cast and what he created for his productions, which is pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
So we're going about this the wrong way. We should be writing our own material around who we have. And then we wouldn't be Seoul Shakespeare Company.
But it would be very OG Shakespeare-esque.
Former Shakespeare Company. Seoul Company.
That actually brings me to the history. So British theater, a lot of it comes from Greek theater. Korean theater obviously has an incredibly different background. The origin's different. The origin comes from a lot of folk theater. It seems like a lot of oral storytelling that got passed down. I thought it was really interesting, based on isolationism and all of that, that the new theater didn't come about until 1902, where it was actually in playhouses.
Right.
How has that altered people's expectations of theater? Is there, so like in Shakespeare, we have the fool character, and we can see that in The Simpsons. If anybody's ever watched an episode of The Simpsons, we see the clown, right? Thank you, Homer. But are there roles that emerge that you still utilize from Korean theater, traditional, like the masks, the music? Are there any of those elements that you bring into Shakespeare theater, or that we still see in Seoul Shakespeare?
Oh yeah. My predecessor, the former artistic director, Lauren Ashmore, she's American, but then she studied Korean music in Korean University. And she had her expertise in Korean instruments and also pansori. Pansori is one of the iconic traditional Korean theater, which is basically just one person singing and reciting the story for like 4 hours to 8 hours. So And it comes with their own way of singing and vocalizing, and she studied that. And when we did King Lear in 2019, she wanted to incorporate those Korean traditional theater elements to our production of King Lear aesthetically. So
She actually did it in Winter's Tale as well.
oh yeah.
After intermission, she was time.
Yes, when we did Winter's Tale after the intermission, when you have the time comes on the stage and expounds how times have passed, it's the personification of the time. So beautiful soliloquy. And Lauren, she also played Polina and also the time, so she clad herself in the it's called Sunbok. It's called the Sunmu, the female Buddhist monk dance. And the attire is called Sunbok when they're doing the dance. She clad herself in that, and she would do the Sunmu, the Buddhist dance, and she would recite the soliloquy in the manner of pansori. And surprisingly, it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And also when we did a collection of Shakespeare's soliloquies and sonnets for one of the anniversaries, she turned one of Shakespeare's sonnets into a song played with kayagum, which is the Korean string instrument, which surprisingly worked. And also when we did King Lear, aesthetically, she made costumes, she made it kind of like a collation of the Elizabethan outfit with Korean medieval outfit. So we had this very distinct look for the show.
So how long have you been artistic director?
I've
Since
been
you've
artistic
taken over?
director since the years of the plague. So I inherited the company when we are at the darkest. So from about 2020,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So it's been it's my 4th year being the artistic director.
So what have you? So I got to hear what she brought, and which is very interesting. I love kind of hearing how she brought some of the Korean theater into the Elizabethan theater. What do you bring in?
The patron. The budget. The big budget. Like, hell with Korean elements, I brought in the thing that makes play happen, which is the money and the patronage. Yes.
I was gonna say, I don't think there's anything more important than that, to be honest. But
I think because Lauren, my predecessor, because she's an American who studied in Korea, she had this great affection for Korean theater. She would know musics in Korean productions that I have never heard of. Whereas I am a Korean who've always aspired to the Elizabethan plays and more traditional British Shakespeare productions. So people would be surprised sometimes by how conventional I am. I have this tendency to stick to the tradition because it's my very personal thing. But I think we have to do the conventional way and master it before we turn it into something else. That's my principle. But we have different directors for different shows. And the other important principle that we have is that we try to give our director as much creative decision as possible. Well, I have my own job as to say, no, that's not going to happen because of money. But yeah, I think that's a different point of view that happens because of the different places that we come from.
Absolutely. So I also love the part that you talked about with tradition and learning. You've got to learn the basics. You've got to master them before you make it your own.
Yes.
We talked very, very early on about the fact that you're an artist as well.
Yeah.
So apparently you can search and find some of his artwork. So I challenge you to do so. And I'm gonna put some of his pieces up when I put this out into the podcast verse. Be ready. But as you said that, does that also have an impact? As an artist, does that also impact how you look at the theater?
Oh, it does. Because I do paintings, because my day job is a painter. and I paint portraits, traditional portraits. And I would get commissions from important people, like the judges and the owners of the companies and the politicians. And I lived pretty much like the 16th century life as a job, being called upon by the people with money and power to honorate them with the portraits. And I think doing a portrait is to create a person, a persona on the canvas, whereas doing a stage is to create a different persona, another persona on the stage. So I think they're basically the same principle. Different media, but the same principle. So whenever I paint anything on the canvas, or whenever I try to play somebody else on the stage, I think it's almost an identical approach. And I always find it entertaining that Richard Burbage was also a painter, and he used to also paint portraits. So I see a parallel in that. So,
yeah. Okay, so I have to ask, favorite Shakespeare play, line, character? Do you have one, all three, any of the above? Ones that really call to you?
You're gonna need another 2 hours. Let's go first.
I grew up in small town Arkansas. We didn't have any theater. We just didn't. So I told you earlier we read Romeo and Juliet in the 9th grade, and they had me read Tybalt, and I actually gave some feeling into it, and the other students went, "What? What are you doing? This is supposed to be boring." Let's see. Then it was Julius Caesar in 10th or 11th grade, which is a wonderful play, but not for high school kids. Because it's about politics and power. But Scottish play was when I was a senior in high school, and we had to do the tomorrow speech. So that was the first time I ever got in front of a group of people. Because we all had to do that in front of the class.
Oh,
it was
wow.
a requirement. So I remember it to this day.
You all had to do the same speech? Oh, okay.
In class.
Yeah. All right.
It just so happened that the local university was doing a production of the Scottish play that year. And we went to it. That was the first play I'd ever seen.
So that resonates.
And then I ended up going to that university and joining that theater department. So I would have to say the Scottish play is the best. And when I went to graduate school at the University of New Orleans, we did an hour-long version of that set in the golf club, where I played the lead, dressed like the Crow. which was really, well, how can you top that? You can't really top that.
Oh,
Yeah, that was cool.
that is very cool.
Yeah. So that's my story.
Scottish play.
Love it.
That's why.
It's a good,
That's why it's
good
mine.
choice.
My favorite plays would be, there are many, but the first thing comes into mind would be Henry V, because that's the play that really got me to love and appreciate Shakespeare. Because before Henry V, I would just read Shakespeare off the pages, no fun. And then I was a high schooler, and it's not fun being a high schooler here. The environment here is so hostile.
I was a high school teacher for 8 years. Yeah.
Well, and I also think what you said, you talked about Julius Caesar, and I was like, that might be very similar to high school, though.
Oh.
With the backstabbing and the treachery and the power struggles.
Yeah.
So, carry on.
Yeah.
So high school.
Whereas being a high schooler here is the constant pressure to succeed in class and all the competitions, and it just stresses you out every day. It's just a horrible experience. And then I was stressed out as usual, and I was just I was unusually relaxing at home, and I turned on a TV, and on the TV was a Kenneth Branagh's film adaptation of Henry V. And I didn't know who Kenneth Branagh was. What I saw was Gilderoy Lockhart from Harry Potter movie. And he was on a horseback, and it was a Harfleur scene where he was threatening the mayor of Harfleur, where he says, if you don't open the doors for us, you basically see like your reverend fathers' heads, their heads be dashed on the walls, babies on the spike. And I was like, that's awesome. Babies on spikes. And I kept watching and watching, and it came to the moment where he delivers his famous St. Crispin's Day speech. And when he said, "If we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss, and if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor." And I was blown away because I felt like he was talking to me, because I was in a situation where everything seems like going nowhere, and it was just pressure and pressure and pressure. Everything looked dark. And then he was saying, just look at it this way. The harsher the situation is, it's good, because if you fail, you have good enough reason to fail. And if you succeed, the worse the situation is, the more accomplishments you would find later. And it's like, okay, so that's what it was all about. Shakespeare is about spoken language. It's about how they deliver it when those beautifully written words comes alive off the pages by those talented actors. Shakespeare comes to life. And I was hooked from that moment on, and I started collecting books of Shakespeare. I started collecting DVDs of Shakespeare movies, and I got into the drama club in school, and that's when this love affair with Shakespeare happened. And then later I found Hamlet appealing. And then also King Lear. King Lear was one of those plays where I had no idea what was going on in the play. I started reading it without preconceived notion, and the story was so gripping. And I was doing my part-time. And I was already late. I was in a subway, and I was reading King Lear, the final few pages, and I know I was already late. I was already like 20 minutes late, but I could not just stop it. I had to continue on reading, and I would be like 30 minutes more late, but I could take it because the story was so gripping. And Richard III is also a great role. And it's such a deliciously evil character. And my favorite actors are Al Pacino, Ian McKellen, Laurence Olivier, and what they had in common was that they all played Richard III one time in their career. And it was such a fun collecting those adaptations of Richard III with Laurence Olivier, McKellen, Al Pacino, and comparing them. And I can go on.
That would be such a fun class.
Richard II is also a very good, appealing play for me as well.
Oh man, you guys are gonna have to do a history now.
We have to do
You
a
have to
history.
do a history.
I hope.
I mean, that's what it takes though. It takes somebody who's passionate about them and can really deliver them and make them come alive on the stage. Because,
Right.
like you said, they're lesser known for a lot of people, but they're incredibly fun when they're done well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know November 1st you're kind of announcing Romeo and Juliet. When are we thinking that Romeo and Juliet is going to be coming out so I can tell the Shrewniverse and anybody in the Seoul area can come?
Probably what we're going to do is have auditions at the normal time in early December. And what I'm thinking is nobody wants to rehearse for 6 months. That would be awful. So taking January and February and doing some workshops. Korean people would say team training, which when Korean people say that, it means going into the countryside and getting wasted, but we're not going to do that. We'll just have...
Oh, the MTs. They go to the MTs. Membership training.
That's what it is, membership training.
Horrible term.
Yeah, it's another word for alcohol poisoning. But yeah, so do basically fight workshop and how to speak properly workshop, depending on who's cast. Well, not depending on who's cast, because everybody needs that.
I was gonna say.
Because when we did Midsummer this year, our short workshops for that were so helpful for everybody.
Yes.
Because it's easy to forget that generally you're speaking poetry. You still need to play the character, but you have to follow the meter. And if you don't follow the meter, it all falls apart.
Right.
And say Shakespeare has given you so many cues
in the meter.
by implanting certain meters. So,
And if you ignore it, then it's folly.
One of my favorite directors, she's one of the head directors at OU, University of Oklahoma, but she always says people just don't recognize that we're speaking in iambic pentameter most of the time, right? Like, I do not want to go to school today, right? It's iambic pentameter. And so she's like, part of it is recognizing that it's the rhythm of how we speak. And they just have to know what they're saying. Because the worst thing is an actor who doesn't actually know what they're saying. And you're just like, oh gosh.
Yes, if you know the rhythm, it also helps so much when you learn the lines, when you have to memorize it, because you internalize the rhythm, because just like you said, it has the same beat of our everyday speech, so it helps you tremendously to learn it fast.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason, because the turnaround in Shakespeare's time period was a week. So that they had to learn their lines, and
that's so amazing.
Yeah.
That's, every time I read about that, I'm blown away. Like, people were just different back then.
It's a different breed of human.
Because they did not have smartphones, that's why. They had better brains.
Or books, for that matter. Most people didn't have any books.
Or music.
So,
Music was this, like the theater was where they came for music. It was where they came for all of these aspects of life that we sit at home and listen to or take for granted.
Our whole lives are based on language and talking to each other.
Yeah.
Which we don't even talk to each other anymore.
Yeah.
Well, we are now.
We are now, which has been delightful.
Yes. Yes.
So is there anything else that you would want to tell people about your organization, about Seoul Shakespeare? Any other thoughts that you would like to bring out?
To spread the good words of Shakespeare.
Yeah, we welcome anybody who wants to play. Every time we do a show, as a producer, I mentioned to the cast and the crew that we're creating our own little world every time. And when the play closes, that world doesn't go away. We're connected for the rest of our lives. You were mentioning something like that earlier about the community. And there's nowhere else you can get that.
And it's open to everyone. I want to stress that it's open to everyone, because when we say Shakespeare, people are scared, they're intimidated, and they feel as if there's like a high fence between us and them. But it's not, because you read Shakespeare, you watch Shakespeare, you will realize that there are so many dirty jokes, and you will see the tropes that have been resonating since him into a modern movies and TV shows, the themes and ideas, and you will find it so much familiar than you expected it to be. So in my case, I always loved Shakespeare. I always wanted to be given a chance to do Shakespeare, hopefully in his original language. And then I was doing my military service, because it's mandatory for all able-bodied young men in Korea to do at least 2 years of military service, another dark period of my life. And I was doing military, but thanks to my English ability, I was stationed in a intelligence command where I had access to English newspapers and English books, and we would have Korean Herald, the English Korean newspaper here, and I was reading it one day, and I found this very little small article about this community in Seoul who does Shakespeare. Back then, the company was operating under the name of Actors Without Borders. Not a very good name, not a very catchy name. But then I learned about them, so I cut it out. I cut the article out. I kept it in my pocket, and as soon as I was my military service was over, I sent him an email that, hey, I must currently just finished my military service, and I go to art school. I can make posters. I can help making props. That's how I got involved with the community, and here I am, being an artistic director of Seoul Shakespeare Company, and it's so much fun. And like we said, it's the sense of community that it provides is immense. It's incomparable. And also, every time I do Shakespeare play, and I was given this precious chance to speak his words, on stage, I have this feeling that I'm standing in the long, long line and traditions that goes back to Laurence Olivier, back to David Garrick, back to Henry Irving, back to Richard Burbage, back to Shakespeare. And the sense that I have that I'm joining the tradition, joining that civilization, joining that culture, gives me meaning. Like, oh, this is delicious. And I want to share the experience with everyone who's interested. Because Shakespeare is all about, it's not about, learning ancient vocabulary or just studying themes. It's about fun and entertainment. And I was reading this book of Shakespeare's biography, A Life of Shakespeare by Peter Honan. And he said, he was explaining about the first folio.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, the first folio, which is the most important secular book in history. And I underlined it. The most important secular book. It's on the opposite side of the Bible. It doesn't contain any doctrines, but it contains people of every situation, every predicament, people of every emotions, the kinds of despair and happiness and joy. You should be able to find what all the drives of life in there. It's liberating to read Shakespeare and do Shakespeare. Yeah.
I think everyone at this table, well, maybe not at the far end of the table, but everybody else at the table would definitely agree with you about that. And I love what you said, Jason, about play, right? The invitation and what you said about it being fun is that come play, right?
Play.
Try, see what's gonna happen. See, maybe you start with a small part. Maybe you start helping with something that's not even on stage, but it's a chance to immerse yourself in a different community. And, I think for all of us, it's a chance to get beyond ourselves and to something bigger.
Each person involved in a show is so important. Once you become involved, you can't leave, because if you leave, the whole thing falls apart. And it doesn't even matter how big of a role you might have. Even if you're just a backstage hand, you have to help with this costume change. If you don't help, then the whole play's going to fall apart. The person's going to be late, and we're all going to be angry. And the audience will be upset. Everybody becomes a family, and they have to work together, and everyone trusts each other.
Yeah.
Shrew-niverse, thank you for listening from all the way overseas. I love your feedback. Tell me what you liked. Tell me what you found interesting. Come, visit, go see Romeo and Juliet. I might have to make another 14-hour plane ride for it, but it sounds like it's going to be amazing. And then just remember, try it out. See what happens. All the world's a stage, and you too can be a shrew. Bye.
Bye.